Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The regular meeting of the Grosse Township Planning Commission will come to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. How's it going, John? First item on the agenda, additions and or deletions to the agenda. Does anybody have any changes that they would like to make? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the agenda as submitted.
So moved.
Motion from Dan? Oh, John. Support?
Support.
Support from Brian. Call to question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. The agenda stands as published. The next item are the minutes from the March 7th Planning Commission meeting. Are there any comments on that? Angela?
No.
John?
No.
Dan?
No.
Brian?
No.
Jim?
All set.
Uta?
Nope.
Entertain a motion to approve as submitted.
So moved?
Uta? Second?
I'll second.
Second from Jim. I'll call to question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 This is actually memorable minutes. It's the first ones. If you look way at the back at the end, you'll see recording secretary, Brittany Buber. So, very good. Nice job. We're glad you're here. Next item is public comment. Don't see anybody here that has any public comment beyond the agenda, so we'll move to the next item, which is a sketch plan review. It is a sketch plan review for a new home construction. There are two applicants, Joseph J. Battaglia of Battaglia Companies LLC, 1221 Bowers Unit 1183 in Birmingham, Michigan. And a second applicant is Chris Eli, Triumph Engineering, 10775 South Saginaw Street, Grand Blanc, Michigan. Legally, the location is Supervisor's Grosse Plot 21. The common description is 27892 South Point. This is a vacant property which did have a house on it, which has since been demolished. The only thing left on it is the mailbox, so it is empty.
Made it easy to find.
Yes, for sure. It's south on Grow, and it's on the west side of South Point, probably about 300 or 400 yards south of Grow. The request is to build a new house on this vacant property with about a 5,000 square foot floor area. The reason this is before the Planning Commission tonight is that the floor area ratio and the lot coverage ratio fall outside the normal permit range allowed in the zoning ordinances. In simple terms, it's a house that's a little bit bigger than what is normally allowed on a piece of property like that in that kind of a neighborhood. It is the second highest, or it's proposed to be the second largest of the 10 nearest properties. The zoning on this is R1B, single-family residential. The articles that we're concerned with here are Article 3, single-family residential, specifically Section 3.4, residential design standards, and Article 21, site plan review, under which the sketch plan process is laid out. So tonight, it is a single-step process. The Planning Commission will review this application and will make a decision, and I would expect the Planning Commission to vote tonight. On that note, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just pull up. So I do have, I have the site plan layout on this particular computer. I don't have the elevation drawings. I can try to get them off my computer if we need them, but I think you guys have hard copies. So if you can bear with me, we'll work with what we've got and we will make our way through this. So if I need to, yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. So, as Chairman explained, petitioners before you tonight for a slight increase in floor area ratio and lot coverage ratio. We have not had one of these in a really long time. So for some of our newer members, you may not have ever seen one of these. I'm looking at you, Angela. But on occasion, this does pop up. With new homes or with additions. So I tried to lay it out in the review letter so that everybody understood how the ordinance works, but I'll try to just give a quick overview and then I'll just explain why we're here and what we're here for. So the ordinance establishes a maximum floor area ratio, which is the usable floor area for a single family home, as well as the lot coverage ratio, which is strictly the ground floor area. So that's coverage of accessory buildings, garages, plus footprint of house, that kind of a thing, but not going up. The usable floor area, if you had a colonial home, that would basically be the first floor and the upper floor of the home, but not the garage. So there's two different ratios that we calculate. And years ago, in an attempt and an effort to dissuade the movement towards Bigfoot housing, which was a big thing up by me in Oakland County, and we did see some pretty large homes here, so it was starting to pop up here as well. We reevaluated and changed the way that we did coverages. And rather than just having a one-size-fits-all maximum, we wrote an ordinance such that it was almost neighborhood-based. So in a traditional setup of a block-by-block neighborhood, the ordinance lays out a provision where we take the floor area and lot coverages of the homes to each side, across the street, and to the rear. And we then calculate an average, and then the ordinance allows up to 150% of that average. Now in this one, it's a little bit different because we have waterfront homes. We basically have one road with only homes up and down the street and some across the street. So we don't have the traditional layout of an internal neighborhood with a block by block setup. So here we've taken the 10 nearest homes. And in this case, we actually used some of the discretion in the ordinance to bump the number up to a point that it was a little bit higher than what the actual 10 nearest homes were. The ordinance allows us to discard homes that are significantly dissimilar. So you might have, like in this case, this neighborhood has lots anywhere from just over an acre to a couple of acres. But I think there were a couple where there were lots that were like 2.5 or 3 acres, and they were just so significantly bigger that you got a bigger lot, even with a really large home, that drives the ratio down. Alternatively, there were some with really, really small, older homes that just weren't a good reflection of the neighborhood. So we were able to replace 2 of them. So the table that's included in the review letter is the table that staff and I prepared to determine exactly what these ratios were to be. So I tried to put it in to keep it, again, it's a little complicated, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. So when you go through and we take the 10 nearest based on lot sizes, usable floor area, and then ground floor areas, the averages are 6.2 and 6.4, 150% of the average, which establishes the maximum, 9.3 and 9.5. The residence that's proposed is at 10.1% floor area and 9.6% lot coverage. Pretty, I hate to use the word, but it's I won't call it insignificant, but it is relatively small. Originally, or I guess in past experiences in use of this ordinance, when we had people come before Planning Commission, they were 2, 3, 4, upwards of 5% over the maximums. These are pretty nominal, but the reality is that they're over, and anything over pushes it towards the Planning Commission. So even the 1/10% on lot coverage, again, very nominal, but the numbers dictate what is allowed and what is not allowed. And we obviously were not comfortable trying to say that, 9.6, rounding it down to 9.5, or there was no fuzzy math involved. We got these numbers as big as we could by ordinance, and they came out just a little bit over. So that's a little bit of the history and a little bit of why we're here tonight. Now, the ordinance does allow Planning Commission to grant up to 5% above the maximum. So the 0.8% and the 0.1% obviously are well within your discretion of what you can consider in this particular case. What I didn't include in the letter, but I did include in the table for the file, is I think I'm going to do math on the spot, which is always bad. I believe the 0.8% on the floor area equates to about 400 square feet, and the 1/10 on the lot coverage is about 50 square feet. So to give you some actual square foot parameters to understand what those limitations were, the lot coverage, obviously at 50 square feet, it's, again, I'm not going to say insignificant, but it's nominal is the word that I will use. And even the 400 square feet, when we're talking about a 5,000 square foot home, quite frankly, it's not that much. And that's why I put this together, because I wanted you guys to see exactly how it falls in line with the neighborhood. It is not, our concerns when we wrote this ordinance were people coming in, doing tear down rebuilds, and building the biggest house in the neighborhood by a mile. That's, in my opinion, that's not what this is. That's not what this proposal is for. They are just barely over. It is not the largest home by either metric, so not by floor area usable or ground floor area in terms of lot coverage. That's why I put some of those points in the summary, that it's like the second and third largest in terms of the actual square footage. So they're not blowing it out of the water. It's just a little bit bigger than what the average would dictate. They do have, and I'm going to try to switch back. Dangerous. So they do have, as part of the site plan material, so one thing I thought was important to point out, so yes, while it is a little bit bigger, they do have additional side setbacks. So really when you think about, okay, the house is a little bit bigger, well, what does that really impact? Well, the street front on this part of South Point, the homes are set back pretty far. It has a side loaded garage, so you're not getting a massive garage view on South Point. And we're also getting some increased side yard setbacks. So the homes to the north and the south, at least in my opinion, there is some additional buffering. There's some additional protection there. And in fact, the minimum spacing between residences is 18 feet. And I think both sides of this are at least 25-foot separation. So while, it's not like 100 feet, but out of that, you do the quick math, do the ratio, that extra 7 feet makes a big difference in between the homes. So because of that, and because they're only a little bit over, I guess the long story short is I didn't feel that there were going to be any unreasonable impacts to the neighbors or the neighborhood in general. And I generally felt as though the proposal is in compliance with the standards that are put before the commission in terms of how you're to evaluate this. And again, these are all summarized in that review letter. So that's the long story short. I'm happy to take any questions you have, or if you do want me to put either the plan up on the screen or I can put the elevations on the Elmo. We do have a petitioner here tonight as well. If you have any questions of them, certainly they'll be happy to do whatever you need.
Thank you, Brian. Very good summary. Are there any questions from the commission for Brian? Hearing none, then let's hear from the applicant. Who is presenting, please? Would you introduce yourself and give us your address?
Chris Ely, Triumph Engineering and Design, 10775 South Saginaw Street, Grand Blanc, Michigan. We're designers and engineers on the home that we're presenting tonight. I don't really know that I have a whole lot more to add other than what Brian had just walked us through. It's pretty straightforward. We're real close on lot coverage, the floor area a little bit more. But we believe we're presenting a home that'll do nothing but enhance the neighborhood and it's consummate with what you'd like to see on Grosse Ile. So,
okay. Thank you, Mr. Eli. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Then I'll bring it back to the commission, and let's just stay there, please, in case there are questions. Brian, let's start with you.
I have no concerns.
Thank you. Dan?
The overages are pretty low, so I really have no concerns either.
Okay. John?
I have no concerns.
Angela?
No, I have no concerns, and all of my questions were answered by Brian Borden, so thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Nice review. I have been here through some of those Bigfoot reviews back in the day. So this is nothing like that. I'm thinking of the one on, it was like my first meeting, and it was massive. But this is great. Familiar with the property, all the homes are very unique. It's not like it's a stamped out subdivision where that all of a sudden there's going to be this house that doesn't match. They're all unique homes on that street. Waterfront property, it's going to probably be a great improvement from what was there, what was existing. So I don't have anything further.
Thank you, Jim. Uta?
Thank you. Yeah, Brian, good analysis, written and spoken. I also have no concerns, and I did want to say I really like the plan. I think it's going to make a nice addition to the street. It won't stand out like a sore thumb. And I think it's an attractive home, takes advantage of the waterfront views. So I have no real concerns.
Thank you, Uta. I have no comments. Would entertain a motion, please, regarding this application.
So moved.
We have a motion from Brian to approve as submitted, correct?
Correct.
Support?
Support?
Support from Dan. Call the question.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I jumped the gun.
Motion carried. Sir, you are approved.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a discussion of potential ordinance changes, specifically relative to accessory structures and uses. It's part of the Planning Commission job to routinely assess our zoning ordinance to make sure that they match the needs of the community. And we just went through that exercise at our last meeting over several that this commission approved, followed by the board approval. And so we moved on following that meeting to look at the issue of accessory structures as they relate to waterfront property. These changes are actually part of Section 1911, accessory structure and uses, specifically related to waterfront lots in the R1B zoning district along the thoroughfare canal. Now, we picked this subset for very good reasons, which will come out during the course of the discussion. But this was an area where there has been concern expressed about the fact that there are a significant number of accessory structures already constructed outside of the normal permit process, and that in part was due to the fact that the zoning ordinance was so restrictive that to even construct it is difficult in many lots. And so the Planning Commission, looking at this, we're looking to potentially alleviate that concern. Our current ordinances limit accessory buildings only in the side yards, and there really isn't a lot of room in most cases, and so, like I said, it's not practical. We've worked on this at the subcommittee level, Jay and Jim and I, along with Brian, and evaluated quite a number of different factors involved in this, and kind of digested a lot of the information that we collected out there, and came back with what we think is a proposal which is now ready for everybody to have their input into. So tonight we're going to do exactly that. This is only a discussion. If the Planning Commission agrees with this or modifies it to the extent that we have support, Then at the next meeting, we'll go through the ordinance change process, the formal process with the public hearing, and the publication and the whole 9 yards. But for tonight, it's strictly a discussion. So, Brian, would you lead us through what we came up with?
I would be happy to, Mr. Chair. Thank you again. Let's switch files. And let's see if this works. It's not going to let me see it how I want to see it. There we go. So I think you guys probably had a track changes version in your packets, I assume, so you can see what the actual changes proposed are. So as John mentioned, yeah, so our first task really was to take a look at the residential properties on the Thoroughfare Canal. Any of you that have driven by or have been around there know that there are quite a few detached accessory buildings down by the shoreline in the waterfront yards. For the most part, none of those would be allowed by ordinance. So they are either non-conforming or they were, weekend specials that never got caught. But there are a lot of them, and we're not really sure exactly when they got there. So our efforts were really to try to find a way to allow other residents to have some opportunity, or at least have more opportunity than what they currently have, to put up a detached accessory building, but to do it by the book, basically. So we didn't think it was fair that out of this whole neighborhood, and it's not even a neighborhood, it stretches multiple neighborhoods, but I'm going to refer to it as a neighborhood to make it easier. It really wasn't fair when, I have a property, I'm the middle house, and my neighbors to each side all have structures that I'm not allowed to have if I come in and ask for permission to put it up there. And there really isn't, other than neighborhood character, there isn't a great variance scenario for the entirety of these neighborhoods to come in and start asking for variances. That's not really how we want to handle it. So the thought process was, let's find a way to tweak the ordinance, allow other residents some opportunities that they don't currently have to do something that is more consistent with maybe what their neighbors have, albeit maybe not to the same extent. And this is where we did pull back a little bit in terms of sizes, in terms of location and setbacks, because I think what we wanted to do was, the first draft actually went much further. We were thinking about allowing bigger structures. We were thinking about allowing them all the way down to the shoreline. And what we came up with was what I think is a pretty fair approach, where we're using some data that we were able to collect from what's out there in conjunction with some existing ordinance standards. So for instance, the 6-foot side yard setback, that's consistent throughout R1B zoning everywhere. So unless it's a fence, there isn't going to be a structure or building within 6 foot of a side yard lot line in the R1B district. So we felt as though that was a pretty consistent item. The next thing that the committee, I don't want to say we got hung up on, but we weren't sure that we wanted to allow people to build them all the way at the shoreline. There's still, a lot of these ordinances, your waterfront provisions, and then a lot of other waterfront applicable ordinances are trying to keep sight lines open and trying to keep view sheds open across properties. And people have different opinions about that, but that's kind of how we've gotten here, and that's really what we've been tasked with trying to do. So instead of allowing them all the way down to the shoreline, even though many of them are there, we thought that an appropriate resolution to that was to put in a 25-foot shoreline setback, which is consistent with your natural features section of the ordinance. So in every district, unless it's a permitted waterfront structure, you cannot build buildings or construct structures within 25 feet of the shoreline, or I believe it reads out to the average high water mark, depending on what type of body of water it is. So we thought we would apply that in this scenario. So even though it might pull the buildings back a little bit away from the water for a new neighbor or for a new building, we did think that that was at least an appropriate measure, and it was based in something that exists in your ordinance currently. So it's not arbitrary. We didn't just come up with it. We didn't just flip a coin and say, well, should it be 10 or 15? Okay, it's 10. We found something else in the ordinance that we felt worked and was appropriate. So that's where the 25-foot came in. The biggest change in here is really this inclusion of allowing it in the waterfront yard altogether. So right now, you can have it in a waterfront yard, but you can't have it encroaching into the average shoreline setback. So the average shoreline setback is basically where the principal buildings line up. And for the most part, at least if it's a new build, people are building all the way to that average shoreline setback. They're not leaving space to construct a new detached accessory building. So we did think that some allowance for a reasonably sized, albeit relatively small, detached building in a waterfront yard that was placed appropriately off the side lot line, a little bit off of the actual waterway, we felt that that was fair for the other residents, and I'm going to try to use that word more because that was really our goal, was to give them an opportunity that they don't currently have. The other option, as John had mentioned, is in a side yard, but it takes a very large waterfront property to put a detached accessory building in a side yard when you have a 6-foot side yard setback, and then you have anywhere from a 10 to 12 foot wide building, and you have to have 10-foot spacing from the residents. So in essence, you can't just pop a 120 square foot structure in a side yard unless you have, upwards of 30 feet of spacing from your home to your side lot line. And the majority of these just don't have that. So it just isn't a viable option. So we did think, again, looking at the neighborhood character, we felt waterfront yard was acceptable with some of these provisions that include the 2 setbacks, as well as keeping the number, because of our waterfront yard structures are capped currently at 120 square feet. So we did keep it at 120 square feet. We had originally looked at doing something bigger, but John was kind enough to do a lot of deep research on this. And the data that we used in terms of estimation of how many of these buildings are out there, plus how big they are, they really did fall almost within this 120 square feet. So while there are some that are larger, there's no doubt about that, the majority of them we found were about 130 square feet or smaller. So, and I think it was upwards of 80% of those that exist were kind of in that, and maybe it was a little over 130, like 135 or something, and smaller. So we felt, again, that just continuing the 120 square foot max was an appropriate number. And again, not something that's arbitrary. We didn't just make it up. We looked at what was out there. We looked at what the ordinance presents us with currently, and felt like that was a pretty good fit to keep it there. Mind you, all of this is up for all of the commissioners' input. And if you think they're too big and they should be smaller, they're too small and they should be bigger, that's what we're here to talk about tonight. If you think we should reduce the shoreline setback and we shouldn't enforce a full 25 feet, that's what we're here to talk about tonight. But I think we did a pretty reasonable job of working with what we had and using the data that we were able to mine, plus kind of taking that simple approach of using existing ordinances that really fit what our goal was here. And I think that's what you see in front of you tonight is the combination of all of those items. I will add the one thing that we that I included after the fact that was not a discussion of the committee was, if you look at the through lot or double fronted lot line item, we actually had a ZBA case last month where we had an issue with this very scenario of double fronted lots. And there aren't many of them on the island, but there are areas where they exist. And there really isn't an allowance for what I've deemed the secondary front yard. So if you think about a double fronted lot, it's basically a long, usually relatively narrow lot that has frontage on 2 streets. And we were not far from one with our case earlier down on South Point. There's actually an area of South Point where the primary access and the primary frontage is South Point Road, but those homes, quote unquote, back up to Barbara Lane. So both of those by definition are fronts. So both of those become front yards. So similar to that waterfront issue, the only place you can put a permitted structure is in a side yard. And again, you have to have upwards of 30 feet of side setback to put any type of a structure in there. So we did tweak that as well. And we did, again, this term secondary front yard isn't defined. I was hoping that common sense would sort of make it work. So I think if everybody understands it in terms of what I was trying to get at, i.e. the South Point Barbara Lane scenario, South Point is the primary front, and then Barbara Lane is sort of this idea of a secondary front. So we wanted to allow that. Did keep in the idea, though, that even in that secondary front yard, we still want you to push the structures back to that full front yard setback line. So in most cases, that's going to be 40 feet. And that was actually, so the ZBA did grant that variance, and it was for a structure, not a building. But part of that discussion was not allowing them to encroach into that 40-foot setback. So they were allowed a yard placement variance, but we maintained that 40-foot setback requirement. So that's kind of what that other line item is intended to address, so that if we do see that again in the future, it isn't something where we have to send someone to ZBA over it again. So again, I think it's kind of logical, and I think it comes back to sort of that idea of fairness. And if you have this lot condition, I mean, obviously years ago when we put this table together, we gave consideration to through lots and double fronted lots. I think we just wrote it a little too stringent to the point where it just wasn't working for people. And again, our goal is to have ordinances that work for the residents and that allow them to come in and talk to us and pull permits and do it the right way, instead of having ordinances that push back at you and sort of make people go out and do things at midnight on a weekend. And again, I'm not saying that people actually do that. I'm just saying we want to avoid that if we can. So I think I covered what I wanted to. John, or Jim, did I miss anything that you guys wanted me to touch on?
No, I think you've done a good job in summarizing the direction that our subcommittee was taking. This secondary issue with the double-fronted lots was not discussed at the subcommittee level because, as the Planning Commission rep on the Zoning Board of Appeals, it was obvious to me, sitting there listening to the applicant, that it was an identical situation to the waterfront. People have put in accessory structures, midnight construction or whatever, and we needed to do something. And this seemed to fit very well with the changes we were making here to the potentially to the waterfront. So that's why I asked Brian to roll that in. But we did not meet on that separately. Well, let's go through now and have a discussion about this. Jim, you were a key player in putting this together. I think that it'd be good for you to share your thoughts.
Okay. I really I liked our approach at the beginning of this, right? We weren't just trying to make sure that we made everything be in conformity. We really kind of thought it through. John, the extra effort you went in on the Google search really helped out. So we probably spent more time talking about the square footage. I remember going back almost, we mapped it out in a room, like what did 200 square feet look like versus 120, and kind of got that idea of what the building structures would look like. And then, Brian, the value you added talking about just how deep the structure would go, right? The bigger you go, you could get these really long, deep structures that would block neighbors' views. That 120 range kind of shortened up the structures. And with the 120 range, we really didn't have to start worrying about windows and things of that nature because the structures really weren't big enough to put a window in, right? So, you could, but you didn't really need to. So It was really thought out. I thought the process went pretty well, and I've been up and down that canal. There's tons of structures, so it just does. It makes sense that we're looking at this now.
Yeah, and just to that end too, originally one of the discussion points, again, square footage was a big one, and when we were at a point of potentially writing this up so that they would be larger, we started finding ourselves making it more and more complicated to the point where, Dan would have appreciated, but we got to a point where, well, these are going to be, pretty big, and if we allow, 400 square feet and somebody does a 10-foot by 40-foot building that, is going to really start to obstruct, and I'm not saying they would, but we started really kind of playing out the scenarios. So we started trying to write architectural requirements. We're trying to put all kinds of things into it, and I'm not sure it was needed. So eventually we kind of took a step back and we went back to that sort of simpler approach of how can we make this work without overcomplicating it. And again, I think we hit that, but yeah, thanks for that comment, Jim.
I think one of the things that you always think about when you're making an ordinance change, you have to think about it not as an exception, but as a rule. In other words, every house on Thoroughfare Canal could do this, okay? And if that is the case, is that an acceptable situation? You don't make the assumption that only 1 out of 5 is going to do it. You make the assumption everybody's going to do it. And you have to be able to look at the ordinance and say, yeah, that does not interfere with the quality of the life of those residents along that canal. And that was, a lot of our judgment. We were not specifically trying to eliminate variances. Right. By allowing massive size and trying to bring all these structures into conformance. That was not the goal. The goal was to address what's the next step for a resident who wants an accessory structure and giving him the capability of doing something by permit. So the non-conforming structures will continue to be non-conforming. That was not the goal. But again, recognizing that 80% approximately of the structures that are there, fall in the size range of 131 square feet or smaller. We're right in range with dealing with what is typical in that area. And we don't worry about the ones that are out there that are 700 square feet or 500 square feet, because there are those, okay? But that's not what we're dealing with tonight. So, it's a different approach. Any more thoughts on that, Jim?
All set.
Okay. Angela, let's talk with you, see what you have to say.
No, I think I enjoy and appreciate the context. It seems like a lot of thought was put into this. When I read through, my packet over the weekend, it made sense. So I appreciate where you're coming from on it, and I don't have any issues. I think the approach is great. I have no problem.
Thank you. John?
The Kindler and Gentler Planning Commission. I love it. We have, this has been an issue for a long time. So my thoughts are the 120 square feet is perfect, spot on. I think that number is good. Basically, we're looking at sheds, right? And people are going to put a shed out there. And I'll ask, the subcommittee to comment again on this, and Brian, you as well. Why do we have a 25-foot setback? What is, I don't get that. Is it just because we want to put a setback in? Is there environmental reasons? Are we really concerned about a 120 square foot building being up to the edge of the water where most of them are now? Why that?
Yeah, again, and I'll let John and Jim chime in as they see fit too. Again, the idea was that as the discussion sort of evolved, there just wasn't a comfort level of allowing them all the way down to the shoreline. I know that some of them do exist there, but we felt again as though we thought some amount of setback was appropriate to keep that area of the waterfront open and undisturbed, at least as far as buildings go. Because right now you can't put anything there anyway. And so we felt as though this was, part of it I think was we're trying to inch up to the line without crossing it. And we felt as though using the natural feature setback of 25 feet was an appropriate measure to not allow them to go all the way to the shoreline, but again, without creating some arbitrary number either. So we're trying to use ordinances that are in place to fit with what we were trying to do.
And certainly I understand that, but I still haven't heard a reason why not, other than because.
Well, again, I think the idea, and I don't want to speak for the rest of them, the idea was to keep that area of the shoreline open. And again, essentially undisturbed, save for docks and boat wells. But that was the idea.
But there's many of them already to the shoreline. So the Bigfoot argument that we have dealt with going back 22 years ago, it was the first time that I've seen that ordinance that we made play out today, because the Planning Commission had the ability to approve without sending to the ZBA a certain percentage over, right? So let's say that I live on Thoroughfare Canal and both of my neighbors have a structure right up to the shoreline and I would like one. And I have to go back 25 feet. And it just doesn't look good at 25 feet. It just doesn't make any sense, right, for my particular situation. Is there any way that we could, in this ordinance, allow a percentage of encroachment past that 25 feet and be able to come to the Planning Commission and make the argument for doing it?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, again, this is for discussion purposes, so we can change this however the group sees fit. I would see kind of an option A and an option B, and I'm sure there's a C that I haven't thought of yet, but, A would be simply to just change the number, if we wanted to allow them, again, by right to move closer. B would be if everyone's good with the 25, but understanding that neighborhood conditions might dictate something else, we could pop in another footnote and write in ability to apply to Planning Commission to encroach into that 25 foot. And ironically, that's how the natural feature setback works as well. Planning Commission can allow an encroachment. I don't know that we would want to apply the same standards. We'd have to look at those. Those are mostly environmental type standards. But we could certainly, it's pretty simple to just pop in a footnote B and say that, Planning Commission may allow a reduction based on, and again, and I'm just spitballing right now, but based on, neighborhood character, based on, placement of existing buildings on adjacent lots. There's a number of ways we could do that.
So Mr. Chairman Schweikart brought up an excellent point, and that is when you make ordinances, you have to assume that literally everybody is going to build or do something according to that ordinance. If we don't have the 25 foot, then literally we have to look at is if everybody just puts a shed up to the waterfront, is that what we really want? And I think maybe you can make the argument that no, you don't, and over time maybe the sheds will fall into the water and create an environmental issue. But I think that having these different scenarios that come up in these different neighborhoods to allow, if we're going to do this ordinance, to allow the Planning Commission to grant a variance to some degree. I don't want to say all the way to the waterfront, but I don't know. I think that makes sense that, yes, we have a standard of 25 feet. However, if there's a scenario that exists that it makes more sense to go closer, you don't have to go through the ZBA process. You can come here.
Right.
Okay, a couple of thoughts, John. There is some data on this. First of all, the way this data was collected was using Google Earth, scanning down the canal, using the scale that's on Google Earth, and looking for accessory structures and covered structured boat wells, and traversing the canal. Now, this is an estimate because when Google Earth took their snapshots, there were leaves on the trees, and so you can't see everything. You just see what you could see, and I reported it. There were 23 boat wells, covered boat wells, not accessory structures, but covered boat wells along the canal. Okay, these are allowed and not touched as a part of this ordinance. There were 40 accessory buildings that I could identify. Of those 40 accessory buildings, 19 of them were within 25 feet. Only 6 were 0 to 5 feet. Another 5 were 5 to 10 feet, and on out from there. So roughly half of the accessory buildings I was able to identify were farther away than 25 feet, which was another one of the reasons why we thought that was reasonable. It's not the 80-20 rule like what we just heard about with the area.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, if you're looking at the data of what's averaged there and you want to have an ordinance based upon something that fits of what residents have already done, and 25 feet is where that is, I don't have a problem with the 25 feet.
Well, it's,
But there are situations that exist where it could be, less than 25 feet. And does that put that applicant directly to the ZBA? If we're going to do an ordinance change.
we don't want to go to the ZBA.
Right.
Don't go there.
Would it be feasible to do a range to say, within 15 to 25 feet? Or like you gave us a percentage in terms of the lot coverage. If you go within this range, you can come to the planning commission
Right.
for.
So what I was just typing up as the discussion was going on, so I just typed up another footnote. And again, for our purposes right now, I simply wrote it up as giving planning commission discretion to reduce the shoreline setback. And so far what I've come up with was, and it's kind of, the first part's kind of vague, but the second part I think fits better. So based upon neighborhood conditions, and location of similar structures on adjacent properties. So if the idea being that both of my neighbors have them 5 feet off the shoreline, then I can come to planning commission and potentially get some consideration to just match what my neighbors have in terms of that setback. But in a case where maybe my two neighbors don't have one, then the way it is now, we would keep that full 25-foot setback in. Or if it's an area, and again, and it might not be 0 to 5 feet. It might, they might be at 10 foot. They might be at 15 foot. But what I noticed, at least in some of the areas, a lot of times what you saw was one neighbor put theirs back in, their right corner, and then the other neighbor put theirs back in the left corner to kind of mirror what the other neighbor had done. So I think maybe some opportunity to
Right.
match.
So what I really like about that is we have a really good structure here when there's an applicant and there's a pre-application meeting, right, where Chairman Schweikart sits down with you, Brian, and kind of goes over everything and what to expect. And I think at that meeting, if there is two structures that are on the adjacent neighbor's property and they're 25 or 30 feet back, and this guy says, hey, I can come to the planning commission and I can get 10 feet. I think Mr. Schweiger would say, no, you're not going to get 10 feet. Don't bother, okay? It's not going to happen. But scenarios that would exist where it makes sense, we could actually make a decision at this commission to allow that.
Well, to add to the fact that in years of high water, some of the thoroughfare canal properties are flooded up to 25 feet, from the shoreline. And I think that's one family in particular I know of that has a accessory structure is up higher because the water came up, so high in the past 5 or 10 years. So it's another consideration that they should at least have in mind when they're putting something in, because we do get years of high water.
Sure.
Brian, do you want to add the words match, but not exceed somewhere in your footnote?
Yeah, what I was going to do was based upon property. Conditions. Neighborhood character. And, okay, so where I'm at now is end location of similar structures on adjacent properties. I'm trying to think how we can phrase that right now. The idea being that if somebody's, we're not gonna allow if your neighbors are at 10 feet, we're not gonna give you 4 feet, right? So you can, and what if I just, and again, I'm spitballing right now, forgive me, guys.
No, that's fine. This is a working session.
Matching, so planning commission may reduce the shoreline setback based upon property conditions, neighborhood character, and matching the location of similar structures on adjacent properties. I'm not sure that's exactly how I want it to read right now, but I think we're starting to massage that out. I like the term matching. I'm not sure how to fit it in yet with the way my brain is trying to write this. That word's not quite fitting yet. But I think we can get there.
So is everybody in general okay with that suggestion that John had?
Would you use the word mirroring at all, or is that outside of the planning?
So I'm just gonna write in some comments. So any term, phrase, whatever you guys want right now, I'll put in here and we'll tighten it up.
I like what Jim said, matching, right? I mean, you're all you're doing is just matching it, right? So I think that's perfect,
Matching,
yeah.
but not to exceed or not to, again,
Not to
the
encroach?
idea, right, the idea, not to encroach more than, something like that. I think I've got the idea. I just,
Well, let's ask
the other side of my brain to start working so I can actually write that.
given the way this is being structured, the way you've laid it out here and the way it's been discussed, why does that have to come to the planning commission? Why isn't that administrative?
It can be. I just wrote it in as planning commission because that was where we started. I can change it to the zoning administrator.
I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, right now with the ordinance, they could, at 25 feet, it would be an administrative approval. If it's 15 feet because of some other conditions, it's not administrative.
Oh, I see
Now,
what you're saying.
what information would we have that administratively you also wouldn't have to make a judgment? Or maybe by exception it comes to the planning commission. If administratively you look at it and say, I don't agree that that's in the character of the neighborhood, and the person that's applying says, yeah, it is, great, send it to planning.
Yeah.
But if both parties basically agree it is consistent, then
Or if the-
maybe it does not have to come here.
If the administrator can go to the site and say, oh, I see that your neighbor has this structure at, 17 feet, the administrator would have the jurisdiction to say you could do, 17 feet or beyond, but not closer, and that wouldn't have to come to planning.
Sure, that, and only by exception if there's a disagreement, the administrator kicks it off to planning and we make the decision. And what that does is, of course, it simplifies it for the citizens.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of that.
Well, the one concern, that I have on this, when I see that, six of the buildings weren't boathouses, but were accessory structures, and they were right on the water. I mean, that's,
Sure they weren't shanties that just,
well, all I can do is see the roof. I mean,
yeah.
no, they were definitely not that. I mean,
I don't know why anyone would want to have something right on the water there, basically a storage shed, it doesn't, but, hey, who knows?
Well, I suspect people who have kayaks or, paddles or things. They don't want to schlep them too far.
Right.
But on the other hand, yeah, they can really take away from the view if you're the kayaker going down and all you see is these sheds. That's not really nice either.
No, it's not. I mean, it gives the impression, well, I think I've mentioned it before, there's a community nearby here that has canals, and you go down, you look at those canals, and all you see are garage doors.
Yeah.
Because everybody's got a boathouse, everybody's got something that's right on the water, and that's not attractive. That's not, that takes away from the openness.
Chairman Schweikart, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Administrative approval, which I have no problem with, okay, what you just suggested, that makes sense. Who would be the administrator to do that?
So right now, technically, some combination of Lori and Derek are your acting zoning administrator. So it would be an administrative decision. It was essentially, the idea is that ultimately it would be Lori, but obviously Lori will have input from myself and Derek.
As long as it was enforced equally, right?
Right.
At, the same standards. We're certainly, all of us up here, by the time we got done debating each other's positions, it would come out as, a fair ruling, right?
Well, I think part of that, John, is, again, that's why I'm trying to write language, but I'm also giving myself some comments to fall back on. I think if we write this properly, it should be very clear
Perfect.
when an administrative approval is warranted.
Right.
And if it is not, we'll allow the administrator or the applicant to come forward to planning commission, and then they can make a case in public to a public body. And, because it could just be a simple disagreement, but I'd like to get the language tightened up enough where it's pretty clear. And again, that's matching, not encroaching more than. I gotta massage those phrases into better, cleaner ordinance language.
And I'm really fine with that. That's-
Yeah, I think we can do it, though. I like where this is going. It shouldn't be too difficult.
Spitballing has never been this much fun.
Okay, well, let's, John, any other thoughts?
No,
Dan?
One thing to keep in mind is the intent behind this ordinance, which is to maintain good views to the waterfront, which is very important. And also, we don't want to create the tunnel effect by having buildings that run between the property lines, creating a tunnel effect. And I think the solution addresses this well. I also definitely support the mirror and match scenario. I really think if you basically match what your neighbor has, the only person that's going to affect the view of is the person who wants to build the structure. I can't see a reason to not allow them to do that, because it's not going to affect the neighbor. The one thing that I didn't see included in here, I thought that may be important, is height. And height is where it comes into play. A lot of waterfront properties are on very steep slope. So sometimes if you have the building low enough, your neighbor can see right over top of the building. And then if you have no criteria about height, someone may want to do a really tall peaked roof or put a loft inside their 120 foot square foot shed, ultimately blocking the neighbor's view. So I think height is important also.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't even gloss over it. I just neglected to say it. So the height would default to the 12-foot maximum. So all accessory buildings, unless you are an exception based on your lot size currently, all accessory buildings can only be 12 foot in height maximum. Now, if you have a bigger lot, there are provisions where you can go taller, you can go bigger, but that footnote would not apply in this scenario. So again, this was where our intent was to try to use our existing ordinances to the best of our ability without recreating something. And I think we all kind of felt that at 120 square feet, that 12 foot was still a reasonable number.
I think you should also mention how it's measured.
Yeah, so height in the case of a pitched roof is measured to the midpoint, just so everyone's aware too. So it's not measured all the way to the peak of a pitched roof building.
I personally think for a 120 square foot structure, allowing 4 foot, say if you have typical 8-foot walls, which is probably would be the most common height for a shed. A lot of sheds are actually shorter than 8 foot.
Yeah.
Allowing you to have the midpoint of the roof 4 foot above that would ultimately allow for a very tall roof. You could probably, at midpoint, that would allow an 8-foot tall roof on top of your 8-foot structure. Am I correct with that?
8 foot on 8 foot, it depends. I mean, it depends on how it lays out, but theoretically, sure.
Yeah, because if it's.
But that's true. I mean, that's true everywhere now as well. So, I mean, unless you guys want to put in a different height requirement for this one particular line item, we can certainly do so.
I think the conditions for accessory structure are unique here because we're talking about the waterfront and ultimately we're talking about views. This doesn't affect other properties. It only affects, it only comes into play with waterfront. And I think to allow so it's midpoint, to allow a 16-foot tall structure for a 120 square foot, 16-foot tall structure, that's a really tall structure.
Really odd looking one too.
It would be a little odd looking, but if you allow it, someone may do it, and then you're gonna have a neighbor who's unhappy because they have this really tall, skinny shed.
Well, and
Someone's going to do it because they can't.
part of it, one of the disadvantages we are at is we really don't have the data to know how tall the existing ones are. So again, that's why we defaulted to the basic ordinance standard of 12 feet. But if the commission wants to reduce that, we can reduce that.
I have a question. How do you get to the 16 foot if we have 4 foot walls or 8 foot walls?
So it's to the midpoint of a pitched roof. So what I think Dan is saying is the peak
To the
could
ground.
theoretically be upwards of 16, but by our measurement, it would be a 12-foot building because we measure it midway through the
So
peak.
you're saying that they could have 12-foot walls?
No. Only if it's a flat roof, yes.
So 8-foot walls.
He's the architect. Let's let him draw
Well,
it.
could you do it, just
course
say
he's an
with a
architect.
maximum? Like a maximum height measured at the peak? Could you change your wording or
It would be funny.
or how, the formula for how height is
Okay,
measured?
gentlemen, one meeting at a time.
We could. I hate to stray too far from how we measure height in general. Height is defined. How we measure it is defined. So I don't know that I don't want to go away from that.
Okay.
I'd be okay if you think that's too tall. Let's just set a new maximum for this one instance.
Dan, what do you think?
I think a new maximum at 2 foot, which would ultimately allow you a 4 foot tall roof. And the building's only 10 foot wide. I think 4 foot would be, thinking about aesthetics, I think that would be fine for a shed. This is ultimately a shed. It's a small little structure there, I think, so allowing a 2 foot height would be sufficient for these unique accessory buildings on the waterfront.
So what I just wrote up was I just dropped it down to 10, keeping in mind we still measure to midpoint.
Or you're going to overall,
But a 12-foot flat building
Yes.
would be useful, I think. Do you know what I'm saying? If you're allowed right now to go 12 feet with a flat roof, that gives you a good amount of storage space. But if you're adding a roof, then that takes it to 16. I think that's excessive. But I wouldn't want to take, if you had a flat structure, I would still want you to at least have, 10, 12, feet. Just judging on, guys are tall and their equipment is tall and kayaks are long, and I don't know. That's just me.
Dan, how's it shake out?
I think 10 foot is reasonable for the max height, which ultimately allows a 12 foot tall structure.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Uta, does that make sense to you?
Makes sense, yep.
Jim? Angela? Okay. Everybody all right with that?
Yep.
Anything else, Dan?
That's it.
Okay. Brian?
My fellow commissioners have taken care of many of my concerns, so I will cease any further comment.
A man of few words tonight, sir. Okay, Uta, how about you?
Not as elegantly said, but I got nothing.
Okay. Well, really good discussion. So I think we beat it up pretty well, and I think we came up with some good positive additions. Is there a consensus on the commission that Brian can go back and polish the words and we can bring this forward for an ordinance change, both for the accessory structure for the waterfront and the accessory structure for the two streets?
Yes.
Same rules apply to both. Everybody all right with that?
Right.
Okay.
Let me clean this up, and I'll run it back through the subcommittee for quick debate, just so I have another set of eyes on it, and we'll get a cleaner version back to you guys at your next meeting.
Okay, excellent. Very good discussion tonight. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on at this point. We are required, at board direction, to submit our potential meeting dates for the calendar, for the community calendar. Brian has put those together for us. This doesn't mean that we're meeting on all these dates. What this means is that should we need to have a meeting, it would fall on one of these dates. Okay, and it's really just an administrative thing. Anybody have any questions about this? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the Planning Commission meeting schedule.
So moved.
Support.
Support from Brian, or motion from Brian, support from Dan. Further discussion, call a question, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That's approved. Brittany, would you make sure that gets to the right people, please? Okay, Chair's report. Brian, is there anything in the hopper? Okay, I think that the fact we were contacted by West Shore ought to be at least raised with the commission.
Fair point. We did have, again, I think at this point, I think everybody has been around for enough time. The proposed West Shore project that was presented to the commission for pre-application conference twice, they did come back in to meet with myself and staff a couple of weeks ago, and I do think they want to resurrect the project. So we may very well, I'll need to follow up with them, but I think we may have them in front of you at an upcoming meeting. And I think as chairman and I discussed, potentially have them come back. They have modified the plans, and I think potentially we might want to have them come in again just on a preliminary basis, present the changes to the plan. We can rehash the process because it'll change a little bit, but not entirely. But again, it's been a year since you've seen them, and it was over a year since the last time that you saw them. So I think that's probably the path we would want to go if the
Well, I
commission
can
is-
clarify that. It is the path we're going to go, okay? They've
Well, I was
been
looking
in
for it.
and out of here for years, and we need to start at ground zero, not only for the planning commission benefit, but the benefit of the citizens. You just can't relate to a project that we haven't seen for over a year. And further, depending upon, the recommendation that, Brian, that you make, our subcommittee may want to meet with the applicant ahead of time to make sure that we're familiar with what's coming up.
Certainly do
so-
that if that's the desire of the commission.
So,
Just let me know.
This needs to be looked at again, starting at ground zero.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I like your suggestion of having the subcommittee meet with them. I just remember the last time they were here, there was a lot of confusion over who spoke for whom on their group's behalf. There was, they did not come with a clear plan or presentation, and they did not seem to have a grasp of what we were looking for as a commission. So I think meeting with you and the subcommittee will help them focus so that when they come here, it'll be a better better conversation.
Very good. Well, we will take that suggestion to heart. So Brian, when they do come back, assuming it isn't a year later, let's get a date together, and Jay and Jim and I, the officers, will meet with them.
Yeah, I do have, I have office hours next week, so Lori and I will reach out to them, and we'll try to get some dates, available dates from them, and we'll work with you all from there.
And Uta, we will do our best to provide guidance.
Good.
Okay, anything else that's out there, Brian?
No, that would be the only thing, other than the amendments that we just talked about. I think there's still some other amendment items that are kind of floating out there, but given how busy staff is administratively, I think we'd kind of like to tackle the one that's in front of us now, since we have pretty good grasp on it, before we kind of move on to the next thing. So I think we're in pretty good shape right now.
We do have a list of several others that we wanted to work on, but let's clear our plate of this, and then we'll start on the next one.
So, Brian, I know at our last board meeting with the retirement of Tony Gray, we made some changes. Have your hours changed? You're now coming in more often?
So, yeah, so the way we've handled it, like just so the commission knows if you all ever need anything. So what we've done is twofold. One, yeah, I've made myself available for more hours, but we've done it on an as-needed basis. The idea being that we'll let Brittany and Lori get into their weeks and see how, if they get jammed up, they get really busy, they need me to come in the following week and help them kind of clear their plates a bit, then I will. But if they're up to speed or it slows down a bit, then I won't. The idea being we're trying to be cognizant of your budget as well. But yes, we've kind of condensed it. Lori and I we talk weekly anyway, but we've incorporated a little bit more review of documents over emails, and just her sending me electronic documents to try to keep her on top of things as she sort of grows into this new role.
Yeah, I think your input on this is going to be extremely valuable. Tony Gray knew the ordinances inside and out, and he didn't need a lot of support. But coming in and looking at that big, thick book of ordinances and saying, geez, I have to interpret this, being able to call up an expert and talk to you directly will get Lori grounded very quickly.
Can you clarify, just for those of us who aren't quite aware of how that's going down in the offices? So is Lori taking on the community planning role? Is that what's?
She is, no, I think you guys are still looking for a community development director, but she'll be taking over, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, so Tony had his duties all over the place. The primary functions were as zoning administrator or zoning approval authority and zoning enforcement or code enforcement. And as I understand it, the former is essentially what's staying in office with Lori, me helping, Brittany then helping with some of what Lori was doing previously, and then the latter being the code enforcement part, I believe is getting sort of adjusted over to your current animal control. Is that right?
Animal control.
Yeah.
So it used to be. It used to be that zoning enforcement was a function of the police department. But over the years, there've been ins and outs of people and who wants to do what and who can and who can't. And so ultimately it ended up in community development. But I think we all feel comfortable putting it back into the police department. For instance, Tony had to be qualified with a firearm in order to be zoning enforcement. Our officers are all qualified to do that. That's something that Julie Cordes is, and it adds to her role as well. And I think because of what she does with animal control, she's already very adept at working with people, with compliance and different things like that. And I mean, that was Tony's strong point. He didn't always go straight to court. He worked with people to get the compliance. So that split is going to happen, but we're still looking for somebody. So
For the community development, I got you. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, so Brian, in terms of a potential next meeting?
So we would
Be ready
have
with the goal being that we will address ordinance.
right. We've got we'll have a cleaned up version of the accessory buildings, and I guess depending upon timing, maybe even if we're able to meet internally with the West Shore group first, potentially have them back in front of the full commission as well. So, but I don't foresee that happening. You know, probably not this month. Potentially, I would think July is certainly potential, though obviously we want to stay away from that first week with the holiday. So if we can get everything in order in the next couple of weeks, we might be looking at a July meeting. Let me see how those dates work.
For the calendar, isn't it the 18th?
Yeah, so the third Monday would be the 18th. I do have a conflict that night. So yeah, if we can't fit something into July, I would say August 1, if we're okay going almost 2 months between meetings. That would certainly, that should be more than enough time for us to have met with West Shore, get them ready to come back in and get this ordinance cleaned up. So if we want to do that as a tentative, and if we need to move it up, then maybe we just reach out to everybody and try to move it up.
Does that fit with you guys in general?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's make it tentative, and we'll see how it goes. All right, anybody have anything else they want to bring up or discuss? If not, then,
I have one comment.
yes.
I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate one of our fellow commissioners here, Brian Pollock, for successfully getting a grant approved for the pathway from Grow Road down to the Airport Nature Land Center there. And
Wow. Congratulations,
him
sir.
and his
Thank
group,
you.
Very good.
arguably the most needed bike path, or what do you call non-motorized? What do you call it? Non-motorized.
Shared use path is fine.
Yeah, okay.
Bike path, shared use path. No
But
biggie.
That's
it's
awesome
been
news.
many, many years that he's been talking about this, and he spearheaded this. So not sure exactly when it's going to start, but we have approval from the aviation side, MDOT, and so we'll see. But anyway, good job. I wanted to just say that to you publicly, Brian.
How did you do that, Brian? Give us how did you work through the bureaucracy?
So as some of you may know, my day job, I work for the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, where I'm a urban planner and I do bicycle pedestrian planning. So I do know about grant cycles, and I knew that the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan was doing a grant cycle for Ralph Wilson Jr. Design and Access Funds. So this is funding that's up to $50,000 that can be secured either for planning purposes or development. And so we were able to fill out an application. You know, I had Derek Thiel assist me, Carl Blotcher, trustee, as well as John Hartig was a part of this. So the brain trust there, we figured out a way of, building a successful application and say, hey, if we're able to get the funds, we'll be able to move this fence and utilize an existing road as a more primitive shared use path that would provide that connection. And so that was it was winning. We were able to get $40,000 for that, and we do have some other philanthropic funds that were coming in. So we're hopefully be able to do a request for bids on that in the coming months here and start that process. I will mention as well is that we're finishing up another Ralph Wilson grant for the repair of the bike path bridge right in front of Meridian Elementary School. So we were able to take that from a wooden bridge into a composite bridge, so that way it'll last a lot longer. And we are also working on a Bellevue sidewalk that would be able to connect from Meridian down to Water's Edge and then wrap up into the Groziel Free Bridge, and then coordinate with the city of Trenton on connecting to the shared use path along Jefferson. So essentially, when this is done, we'll be able to connect between the two units of the Detroit International Wildlife Refuge. So those are just a couple of our plans. Since you mentioned it, sorry Sorry to
I teed it up
bombard
for
you over
Brian.
here.
This is,
but,
keep going.
I just I just wanted to mention that in the future, I hope to have your input on a full bicycle and pedestrian plan for Groseal. So that way we can look out into the future and be able to plan 10, 15 years down the road. So thank you
Brian,
once again.
this sounds great. Thank you very much for your great work for Groseal.
Happy to do
Tremendous.
it.
Very happy.
Can I just say what a joy it is to work with this group? Everyone, we're interested in developing programs and evolving our community and collegial and intelligent and just
Pretty much every
Thank
commission
you.
on the island, Uda.
except
Pretty much.
thank you all.
Yeah,
I say all
we're,
of them.
we're fortunate to have such a great group up here. I'm very proud of this group. Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Motion from John, second. All in favor?